Hey, this is Steve with Blades We Love. If you're watching this video, it pretty much means you bought a screw set from us, and for that I'd like to say thank you. We appreciate the business, and you guys are the reason that we're able to keep the lights on and put food on the table, essentially. So, thank you. So the goal for this video is basically just to give you like a basic informational video on how to take screws out and put them in for the screw set that you purchased. It's not specific to any one knife. It's just a general hints and tips for doing this sort of thing, just to save you some trouble and try to get you headed in the right direction. I'm by no means an expert. I've taken apart thousands of knives and done a lot of stuff with knives, but I'm not the manufacturer, so I'm not going to pretend to be something that I'm not. But I feel like I do have some useful information to share, so that's why I'm sharing it. So essentially, the first thing you want to focus on when taking apart knives is you want to make sure that you use the right tools. And in my opinion, if you look right here, this is Wiha brand Torx bit selector. You can buy this set off of Amazon or eBay for $16, $18, $20. Wiha, in my experience, makes the best bits. They fit the best. They're very precise. German-made tools. And this set, I don't have all of them in the set right here because I took them out. But they usually have all the sizes that you need to work on most knives. So I think it's T5 through T15. And typically with knives, most American knives, you'll need like T6, T8, T9, and T10. Those are the most common sizes that you'll encounter. I would highly recommend Wiha and just keep it at that. Second thing you want to focus on is having a decent driver. This is not as vital. If you're going to work on knives a lot, I would recommend getting something like this. This is a Wera ratcheting driver, and it costs $40 or $50, but it's super ergonomic, and it'll help you. It'll help save you some heartache. But you don't have to use that. I mean, you could just use anything that fits the 1/4 inch bits. Okay, so we have this, and then basically when I'm installing screws, putting them in, I'll use a smaller driver like this because I like to kind of feel what I'm doing. With a big driver like this, there's a much higher risk of over torquing something or breaking or stripping something because it gives you a lot more leverage as you're working on things. So for me, when I'm installing, I prefer to use this. If you only have something bigger like this, then when you're installing, just slow down a little bit, take your time, try to feel it, try to hold it with your fingertips and not crank on it with your wrist, okay? Because these are tiny little screws and they don't really need that much pressure to be installed correctly. All right, so there you go. Now, when you buy a screw set from us, it comes in a little envelope. It comes with a little helpful insert that basically gives some advice on how to install the screws. And then also that's going to be a companion to this video, okay? And so you'll have a little paper reference and then this YouTube video to help you out. So essentially inside the package, you'll get the screws, and we typically label them. So like this one, clip, so those would be the clip screws. Body and scale, which basically just means the screws that fit along the scale are in the body, okay? And then the last one on this one would be fill. And on fill, it's just the empty slots for, if you flip the clip to the other side, you're always going to leave empty slots on some of these knives, and some of the sets we do have fill screws on. So essentially, if you're going to install screws, you want to, I think the easiest, smartest way to do it is take one out, put one in, save you from trouble. And then I think in general, it's going to keep a better tension on the knife and keep it tighter within the specs of the manufacturer when they assemble it. So that's what I would do. So what I'll do is I'll just install the clip screws real quick. Drop these out, set that aside. Now, what you want to do when you are taking screws out is you want to make sure that you get the tip of your bit mated up with the screw head just right. So you want to run it where it's perpendicular to the screw. Just, you don't want it on an angle or anything because you're going to risk stripping the head out. And then what I do is I'll just hold this tip and I'll just feel like that, make sure that there's not any slippage Okay, you want to make sure that this is sitting relatively flush and that it's going to have good bite when you go to spin it. So once I'm there, I just break loose and spin the screw out. Set it aside. Pick up your replacement screw. I'll switch to this driver here. What I'm going to do is when I go to slip it in, I go counterclockwise. I can feel it click. I know it's lined up with the threads, and then I just line it in. And you don't have to over tighten. That's why I like using a little bit like this, because you can just tighten. You want it tightened to snug. Okay, anything past that, this is not like a 1/4 inch wood screw that you're driving in with a big screwdriver. These are little 256, 2mm wide screws that you could strip the heads out, or you can break the stems on them if you crank too hard. Okay, that's not a very common thing, but it's just better to do something with a little feel so you can avoid that. So let me do these other two. Same thing. Make sure I get a good bite, perpendicular. There we go, lined up, just snug. While I'm doing this, I can also talk about Loctite. Sometimes we use Loctite. Typically, if we're doing a custom knife, we'll use Loctite on the pivot or on the clip screws. Not always on the body screws. They don't seem to need them as much in my experience. But if I do use Loctite, I just put a very tiny, thin little layer on the threads and then wipe the excess off with a Q-tip. That way you don't want excess Loctite in your knife. But I would recommend Loctite 242. It's the blue Loctite. Okay, so there we go. We got the clip screws installed. Now let's jump to fill, since it's just on the opposite side. Set these aside. Obviously with fill, you don't have to take any screws out. You're just putting screws in. Makes it a little simpler. So I'm just going screw by screw, making sure that I don't cross thread or anything. So I'll just go counterclockwise, get it lined up until I feel it, and then I just drive it in and just tighten it to snug. There we go. Usually you can feel her here. The more you do this, the more you just get used to it. Okay, so we got those 3 installed, and then we just have 1, 2, 3, 4 body screws to install for this set. Also, I like to do this sort of work like on a microfiber cloth because it tends to kind of cling to the screws. And trust me, you don't want to go searching for a screw that fell on the floor through your carpet. I have done it many times, and it's actually not that much fun. So working on something like this, that if a screw drops, it kind of just grips it. That's quite helpful. Okay, same thing. Just make sure everything's mated up, counterclockwise, and spin the screw out. Now, some knives and some manufacturers, they use a lot more Loctite, and even within the same model, you'll have whoever the installer was or the assembler at the factory. Some people, they're a lot more liberal with the use of Loctite than others. And so, sometimes the screws are a lot harder to get out than on this particular knife, which is kind of nice. But if so, remember, always make sure it's mated up, perpendicular, square, everything's flush, and then start slow. Don't crank hard. Start slow, and it'll spin loose. Okay. It's that steady, even pressure that you want to apply to the screw head that's going to serve you the best when taking a screw out. Okay, there we go. Now just 2 more. Might want to set that one down. And relax. Don't ever get in a hurry with this kind of stuff. That never helps. Feeling stressed when you're working, that never helps either. So if you're in a stress mood, I'd recommend waiting until you feel a little more relaxed. Okay, so we swapped them out, and typically what I'll do, because anodized titanium can get dirty from the oil in a person's hands, is I'll get a little Windex, diluted with a little thing on there, diluted with distilled water, and I'll just clean the knife and the screws like that. Dry side, just dry it off, and then there you go. You got a set of installed custom titanium screws. Just add a little color and flavor to the knife. I'm trying to think if there's any last things I want to recommend. Yeah, just essentially if the screws look dull or dirty, that's usually from the oil in your hands. And just like I was saying, a microfiber cloth, you can get these at Walmart. Works well, along with some Windex and distilled water. I mix it together. If something's super dirty, like it's actual oil, like for lubricating oil on it, I might use Super Clean diluted with water, like maybe a third Super Clean, 2/3 distilled water to clean anodized titanium. The only other thing that I can think of offhand that I might recommend would be on some knives. Let me see here. Do I have like a paramilitary? If you're working on something like this, you can see there's a barrel standoff in the middle. Sometimes if you go to spin this side out, the other side will start spinning. So sometimes you'll need to get two bits to make sure that it works. So like on these would be T9, you might need two T9s, one to hold this side, the other to spin this side. So that's about the only other thing I can think of. At any rate, again, thanks for your business. Hopefully this video was helpful. I'm certainly not a videographer or somebody that's like skilled at this particular thing, but I thought, I wanted to make a video that was just helpful for my customers to install the screws that they purchased. All right, thanks.